This part's a lot like a roundtable meeting too, where everybody's milling around and talking to each other. So we're going to talk about now where we go next. Let me go through just a couple of slides. So this is the outline that was provided to us by the Colorado Water Conservation Board for a basin plan. Let me just walk you through the big chunks. Section 1 is basin goals and measurable outcomes. Section 2 is evaluating consumptive and non-consumptive needs. We're going to try to drop that word non-consumptive. We're really talking about environmental needs and recreational needs. Section 3 is evaluate constraints and opportunities. And the key there is that if you recall the last panel in 2012, we decided we were going to start figuring that out. We put together a grant request. CDM Smith responded to that. We were going to go down this track, and we had to sort of reorganize it around these sections. So I'll come to that in a minute. You recall in the what are your needs, what are the projects and methods to address those needs? So Section 4 breaks those down by category. And then Section 5 and Section 6, how are you going to do it and how will you know whether you got it done or not? So this is the band. I work for Westwater Research. Our fiscal agent is Pikes Peak Regional Water Authority. Southeast Water Conservancy District was the fiscal agent on the original effort we were going to have on the wet-dry average stuff, and CDM Smith is doing that work. And then we've taken many of the subject areas and put them into categories and brought folks in to help us with that. So let me just go sort of right to left. Kim is with Colorado Springs Utilities, and she's been doing the mapping work, and we'll talk about this watershed health idea. Kyle is our non-consumptive rep. He's doing sections 2.1 and 4.7, the environmental and recreational. And part of what we're doing today and part of the big picture is most folks think about water in terms of those uses. So we're looking for your input. We've got an input team and an input program. That's section 4.1. This forum is a part of that section. And so Kyle will be talking about how we're approaching that and how we'd like to hear from you a little bit. Section 4.3 is conservation, and Mark Shively, formerly with the Douglas County Water Resource Authority, has got great experience on both the education piece and really real water savings, particularly in municipal settings around lawn irrigation. And then Brett Gracely is bringing the municipal perspective. So my wife and I used to live in Washington, D.C., and we drive on the Beltway. And one day I'm driving on the Beltway and I'm listening to the traffic report, and the reporter says, somebody's driving the wrong way on the Beltway, and so watch out. And I thought, oh no, my wife's driving there, and I better call her. So I call her on the cell phone. I said, honey, are you on the Beltway? She said, yeah, I sure am. I said, well, there's a car driving the wrong direction. And she said, there's not just one of them, there are hundreds. So we don't know if we're on the right, if we're going the right way or not, if we're going with traffic. But we're going to try to figure that out. So let me just give you a couple more background pieces here. You heard a lot about storage. So we have these themes. This is part of our section 1, our goals and measurable outcomes. Storage is capacity is critical to solutions in all subject areas: conservation, environmental, rec, municipal. We've got to make maximum use of this native imported water. Efficiency and reuse are critical. And don't let the gap get bigger. And then the fundamentals are, it's not just gap singular. There are gaps in every subject area. There are ag gaps, we talked about those. There are recreational environmental gaps. And we're really counting on forums like this and your input to help us identify those gaps, and more importantly, and it's on the back of this sheet, what can we do about them? What are the projects? What are the methods? How are we going to tackle this stuff? And again, we talked about those extremes of hydrology and the challenges we sometimes face under the Kansas Compact. So we're in this outreach mode. This forum is sort of the midpoint, or really the kickoff, if you will, of this outreach effort. Roundtable meets second Wednesday of every month. We're meeting up here at next month at CSU Pueblo in the Student Center, May 14th. Come join us. If you go to the Colorado Conservation Board or the Colorado Water Plan website and you want to provide input, one of the things it says is go tell your Basin Roundtable about your idea. Now, there's a place you can give them input, but they also direct you to the roundtable. And our timeline is we're due up in July 31. So we want to hear from you. We now have our own website. I'm going to put my friend Elise Bergston on the spot. She's the lovely lady there in the white blouse. She is our input coordinator. If you fill one of these sheets out and give it to her, she'll make sure it gets into the process. She's also monitoring the website. So we're serious about that input idea. So now I'm going to be technically challenged and see if I can switch to the next slideshow. Where'd they go? There we go. Okay, so our first presenter is Kyle Hamilton. He's talking about the non-consumptive needs, but also that linkage with the input. And that's your...
All right, thanks, Gary. All right, hello, I'm Kyle Hamilton. I'm with CH2M Hill. Gary asked me to be part of this team here recently, I think for a couple reasons. I'm an engineer with CH2M Hill. I've worked on storage projects and conveyance projects and solving problems and needs, but what I've also had the opportunity to do a lot is deal with the environmental and recreational aspects that often go with water type projects. The old saying used to be to get a big water project through NEPA was 3 years and $3 million. Now it's 10 years and $10 million. So you really need to account for those recreational and environmental aspects, and so we're going to work that into the Basin implementation plan. I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. And I'll also talk a little bit about our outreach. Okay, so I think you've heard already, non-consumptive, that's a term a lot of people do not understand. Environmental and recreational needs and uses is a simpler term. That's what we're talking about with non-consumptive. The original term related to uses and activities that didn't consume water, like agricultural or M&I activities, but even some of our recreational environmental activities do use some water, plant uptake, etc. But when we talk about environmental and rec, we're talking about rafting and whitewater play parks, riparian and endangered species, the fisheries. We heard from Greg, and he got the award on all the great work he's done on the Arkansas River related to that fishery. So that is a non-consumptive use and activity on the river. Bird watching areas, waterfowl, all of those activities that relate to water are what we're talking about here. And these are the values that often resonate really well with the general public. The general public might not understand municipal, industrial, and ag very well, but they understand where they go fishing, where they go rafting, things like that. So just to tie non-consumptive back to the state plan asks for a consumptive needs assessment, and we need to work that into projects and processes, and we will document that in the plan. And the IBCC had a vision statement. They said, we envision a Colorado that balances M&I, ag, environmental and recreational water needs and promotes cooperation among all users. Our last panel had some common themes. They said storage, but they said cooperation. That really plays a big part in water storage projects and all types of water projects in today's era. So again, the connection with environmental and recreation to our state and its economy and the need for water. Colorado Water Conservation Board states that these activities, fishing, paddling, rafting, generate $7 to $8 billion of revenue for the state and employs over 85,000 people. So that's a little background on non-consumptive. In the past, you might have thought these factors weren't paid attention to as much as they are today. So I want to hit on some of the reasons why that is. Environmental protection is becoming more and more important. We have agencies and nonprofits that are really focused on those activities, and they get involved in NEPA processes, and they need to be partners instead of opponents on a lot of our projects. There's a big public desire and benefit to non-consumptive uses, and the economic importance is obviously a huge driver. Another one I wanted to hit on was the regulations with endangered species compliance, et cetera. There's a project occurring up in Metro Denver right now, and it's over $100 million water storage project. Half of the costs of that project are related to mitigation for environmental and recreational impacts. So you really need to account for these factors. So we can also have better ways of doing business. The Arkansas River Flow Management Program is an excellent example of how managing flows can help a fishery, it can help the rafting industry, et cetera. And lastly, there's a parallel project just similar to this going on a larger scale for the entire Colorado River Basin through the Bureau of Reclamation, where we are working to balance M&I, agricultural, and environmental and recreational needs for the entire Colorado River Basin. So similar to what you heard today, we need to think of all of us as one Colorado. Reclamation is thinking of, we need to think of the entire Colorado River Basin together. So the Arkansas River has a lot of really great environmental and recreational values. We heard about the gold medal status that was recently awarded. We know that it's the most popular or one of the most popular rafting stretches in the entire country. There's numerous creeks and reservoirs, Pueblo Reservoir and all the others that have a lot of fishing and boating and other activities. Bird watching out east along the lower portions of the river. We have the native fish species, one that if you're paying attention to the greenback cutthroat trout news, and Doug Krieger and his group know this very well, is the only remaining true greenback cutthroat trout is in the Arkansas watershed up in Bear Creek outside of Colorado Springs. So we do have endangered species within our watershed. And the whitewater play parks, they're a major economic driver for Buena Vista and Salida and other areas where they bring in those types of river users. There's so many activities on the Arkansas River. This is the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area map. You can hardly fit all the labels on the map because there's so many great things to do along this river corridor. So as we talk about M&I and ag, there is a really popular area that we're dealing with here in the upper watershed. And I saw a survey that the Arkansas River is the most popular place to fish in Colorado. All right, so Gary talked a little bit about the past efforts in SWASI 2010. They use a process to identify these values, both environmental and recreational, and use a watershed basis and identify the areas within the watershed with the highest number of values. And a GIS map was used to summarize those really important areas within the watershed. So that's where we've been in kind of a tie for the recreational environmental aspects into the state water plan. So where do we go from here? As you've heard earlier, we really want your input on this process. This isn't a, we're telling you what needs to occur. We'd like to hear from you what needs to occur. If you boil this down, what do you want? You know, do you want more flows, fewer flows? Do you want different fish? Do you want different opportunities? We want to hear from you. So we've got a few ways that we're doing that. We want to gather the input from citizens and agencies, all the stakeholders throughout the basin. And we really want Arkansas River Basin specific information. So if you have an idea that might be more global, statewide, feel free to give it to us, maybe identify that as a more global comment or a global request, and we'll summarize all of this information and it'll get worked into the basin plan. So the outreach methods that we're using, one is this forum, and Kim will talk a little bit about the maps out on the walls and how we're using that as an opportunity for you to provide input. We also have the website, and that has a lot of the information, the studies, the reports, the presentations. So if you're looking for more information, you can go to that website, and I'll show that here in another slide. And there's a way for you to get involved. You've heard about this input form. We have hard copies here for you to pick up today, or you can use the maps on the wall outside. And then we have a bunch of community meetings coming up. So our website is www.arkansasbasin.com. And there's resources information, there's how we got here, and there's a how to get involved button. And so the red circle down here is an input form. So if you go to our website, so if you don't have time to fill out a form or put a dot on a map, go to the website at your leisure. You can click on this input form. And the questions that you'll be asked are, where do you live? We're just trying to get an understanding of which county you are within the basin or outside the basin. What are the important needs or areas of concern in your opinion? And it's a free-for-all. We're not putting any boundaries on this. A small need, a large need, if it's nuisance species, if it's more fishing access, whatever it might be related to environmental and recreational information. But we also are gathering information related to municipal, industrial, and agricultural comments and feedback. So feel free to give us comments on any one of those categories. So the next question will be, what actions do you think should be taken? If you know them. If you don't, that's fine. If you say, this is a problem or this is a need, I don't know how to solve it, but I'm going to identify the problem, that's fine. Just put that problem down for us. If you have a specific project in mind that you think can solve this problem or need, go ahead and list that for us. And then there's a final catch-all of what else should our roundtable be including in the plan. What should we be thinking about if you attend this conference and you say, gosh, they never talked about this topic. I want to work that into the system. Use this as an opportunity to make sure that our plan is all-encompassing. We're also planning a whole bunch of community outreach meetings throughout the basin. So you can see the list here. These are on our website as well. They are starting here this month, and they're going to continue over the next couple months, and we are still scheduling some of the final meetings, so feel free to check back to the website and look for updates. But hopefully you find a location here near you and can attend and provide additional input if you'd like. So Gary showed you the outline for the Basin implementation plan. So the environmental and recreational pieces will roll into section 2.1 for the needs, and that's where your input can actually show up in the plan. Section 3 that Mark is working on talks about some consumptive and non-consumptive constraints and opportunities, so that can address non-consumptive as well. Then finally, section 4.7 talks about the projects and methods. One example project I thought I'd highlight is there's been a lot of talk about the Arkansas River diversion improvements on the upstream area of the river near Granite. A project like that has multiple benefits. We've heard about the win-win projects that help both, say municipal and recreation. This is a project where work on that structure could help municipal through their river diversion and intake. It would help the rafting industry because it would get rid of an unsafe structure that they need a portage around, and I'm sure there's going to be fisheries impacts and benefits there as well. So those win-win projects that can pool funding from multiple agencies and multiple sources to solve multiple needs. That's what we heard in the earlier panel about partnerships and opportunities to work together and spreading those costs. Those are the best projects, and we'd really like to hear from you if you know of projects like that. So that's my piece on non-consumptive. So hopefully when you hear non-consumptive, you now think environmental and recreational, and we'd love to get your input. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take questions at the end. Let's thank. Okay, our next speaker is with CDM Smith. Again, they were the folks that were going to help us understand this, and we had to kind of adjust it into the Basin plan format. Mark McCluskey, let me pull you up here.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Mark McCluskey. I'm with CDM Smith, a consulting firm here in Denver, but I am working with the Basin Roundtable, Gary Barber and Kyle, on the Basin implementation plan. Today here I'll be talking about Section 3 of the Basin implementation plan and what we're doing to accomplish that and what we've done to date. And it relates to the consumptive and non-consumptive uses and looking at the opportunities and constraints within the basin. To do that, we're undertaking it in 4 different steps here. We're doing an analysis of existing water use data. So I don't know if several of you have received some phone calls from either ourselves or some of my colleagues requesting recent water use data. That information will be used to help better understand the operations in the basin, which I'll talk about a little bit here later. Understanding the water management and administration in the basin, how we manage water, the administration and some of the compacts definitely help guide and regulate how we can actually move water within the basin. So that might provide some additional opportunities, and it might constrain some options that are potentially on the table or that could have been mentioned. And then also doing some additional initial hydrologic modeling is trying to understand a little bit better some of the things I think Jim mentioned during his talk, is that to better understand operations in the basin, what happens under varying hydrology, when demands increase, what goes on in the basin. And then finally, using that model to simulate current and future shortages. So the first thing that we're undertaking is a water data review. So we're identifying and obtaining water use data to support the study, and we're focusing on the more recent time periods, 1982 to say 2012. That's when recent water administration in the basin has been, say, implemented. We also think there's a varying enough hydrology in which we can understand operations in the basin. As you might have heard in previous talks, the Arkansas Decision Support System is being undertaken as a part of the Arkansas Basin in the state, but it's only gotten to the feasibility study. So we're leveraging any information that was collected as a part of the feasibility study to use as a part of our data collection process. And then also working with the Division of Water Resources hydro-based data set, our hydro-based database, and then we've been working closely with the Division 2 division engineer, Steve Witt and Bill Tyner. And then we'll also be soliciting information from water users and providers in the basin, including, say, the Bureau of Reclamation. And the data that we're collecting as a part of this effort will be used to help better understand the operations in the operations report, which is one of the components that we'll be writing and drafting as a part of Section 3.2 of the Arkansas Basin Implementation Plan, and then also using that information to help develop and guide the hydrologic model being built. So, some of the basin operations, and this is something that was one of the goals of the 2012 memorandum that was mentioned earlier, is that they wanted, the Basin Roundtable wanted to better understand operations in the Arkansas River Basin. In particular, wanted to look at those operations and how they are undertaken during a dry year, an average year, and a wet year. So what's actually occurring? Are we draining reservoirs? Are we pumping more groundwater? Is there less water in the stream? So to help better understand that. So we'll be looking at how those operations, diversions, storage, exchanges, groundwater withdrawals and return flows are impacted by that variability, or how it's occurred historically. This was just an initial draft of a basin operation, so we're trying to identify all the major cities, municipalities pulling water off in the basin. To put all of them on there, at least at this point and at this scale, it was a little cumbersome. So it's just to identify, we're looking at the basin as a whole, identifying the key municipalities and also agricultural diversions within the basin. So in respect to opportunities and constraints, we have to make sure that we better understand the water administration in the basin, both the state rules and any rules or compacts that relate to the Arkansas Basin in particular. So the purpose of this is to provide a better common understanding of those rules and how the Arkansas River Compact may constrain any of the potential opportunities for future projects and processes. And so those will be described in various components in the plan, both in surface water administration, groundwater administration, since we do have Denver Basin aquifers up in El Paso County, then we also have some of the designated basins. And then finally, compact administration. So the third component here is really to look at model development and understanding basin operations so that we can do simulations of operations within the basin. We wanted to develop this tool so that we can also visualize some of the water movement within the basin as we do different scenarios. As I mentioned earlier, the Arkansas Decision Support System has gone through a feasibility study. but that is a multi-year effort that will cost upward of $7 million and won't be completed in time enough to get our information for the Arkansas Basin Implementation Plan or the Colorado State Plan. So we had to identify a secondary option of what can we do within the time frame that we have and the resources we have. And that's where we're looking at using this simplified water allocation model, which we call our term SWAM. And so to talk a little bit about the simplified water allocation model, it's a generalized water allocation software for planning purposes, and I think it'll be a great application here in the basin. It's easy to use, well suited. It runs inside Excel. It's very portable and transparent. It's something that includes, demand nodes for agriculture, municipal, industrial uses, and also uses water rights and water priorities. It operates on, say, a monthly time step, but one thing is it might be limited in the number of actual nodes that you have. Others that are familiar with other different modeling software packages, you can develop an infinite amount of nodes, but in this it's more simplified. I wanted to give you all an example or show an initial draft of what we're doing for the model. And so this is the interface of SWAM. It runs within Excel and uses Visual Basic. And basically it uses various objects along the left side here that include everything from tributary inflows, in-stream flow reaches, municipal and agricultural diversions, as well as reservoirs. So it's a little hard to see here on the figure, but we basically have developed a schematic of the Arkansas Basin from the headwaters all the way down to the Colorado-Kansas state line here, including the major diversions. And then finally, we'll be using that model to help assist the Basin Roundtable in doing some sensitivity planning or sensitivity analysis for future planning, looking at varying hydrologies, dry climates, wet climates, and also looking at future demands. As SWASI has projected demands through SWASI 2010, which is our current understanding of demand growth in the basin, we'll be using that information to see how will the basin react with these increased demands in the varying hydrology. And I think with that, I'll wrap that up from my section.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little background before I introduce Kim, who's our map maker and made those excellent maps out there. When watershed health was added as part of the Basin Implementation Plan outline, it was last summer over at the CWCB meeting in Alamosa, and you could smell the smoke, right? The fire was ongoing. And so it was not only included as part of the outline, it was a high priority item. We decided as the ARC Roundtable, there's so many people who have so much experience with this, and the federal agencies are so involved, the lessons learned in the Waldo Canyon fire and the Black Forest fire and the West Fork fire and the Rio Grande. Maybe what we ought to do is just have a facilitated process. So let's bring the experts in. Heather Bergman with Peak Facilitation is our facilitator. And let's invite as many people as we can and figure out what our watershed action plan is. And it really came down to fire suppression, but post-fire mitigation. What do you do after the flood? I'm a proud graduate of Manitou Springs High School. They're just getting hammered now with flooding. What is the real condition of forest health? And what are the other environmental services, watershed services, wetlands, things like that? And how do we put all that together? We don't need to start from scratch. We just need to bring folks in and invite them to help us. And particularly, we need to invite the federal agencies and the state agencies who have so much experience and knowledge. We need to invite them, encourage them to participate. So the challenge we had with our limited budget was how are we going to map all of this stuff? The dialogue really started with the folks, Mark Shea and his team, Kim. How are we going to do this if that Waldo Canyon fire had jumped Highway 24, where I grew up in Chipeta Park, and made its way onto Pikes Peak? it would have been ugly. And it would have been ugly for water supply in Colorado Springs for a long time. So they've spent a lot of time and done mapping, and they stepped up and offered to provide in-kind services and do the mapping part of this watershed health dialogue. So I'm going to tee up Kim's presentation, and she's our map maker, GIS expert, and tell you what we're doing.
So first, I'm going to dispel the myth. I am not a GIS expert, but I do use it as a very valuable tool in natural resource management. And it is a great planning tool, and it is not a useful tool unless you have input from everybody who adds data to that, who manages it, who QA/QCs it. Otherwise, it's just garbage in, garbage out, basically. But what I wanted to give you a quick introduction to Colorado Springs Utilities Watershed Planning Group. I mean, a lot of you know us as a water provider, but we do have other aspects to the company that really works on protection of water quality, and that is through the watershed planning effort. It started in about 2008. Mark Shea is here, and he's the watershed planning supervisor. And there's myself that does source water protection, and Eric Howell, who is our forest management expert. And so we formed in 2008 and started to develop that program. And you know, watersheds are very complex landscapes. There's a lot of issues, but you know, I think it's a great and exciting subject. I mean, we live, work, and play in these landscapes that also provide us water for our uses. And utilities was grappling with, you know, how do we address the issues outside of storage and conveyance that really impact the operations and water quality. And so that's why the watershed group started. And we built a guidance document to help guide the program, and we picked focus areas for management, and that is the list that you see up there. It's just forest management, that's the forest health issues, the wildfire risk, the collaborations with the Forest Service, things like that. Environmental management, you know, there's noxious weeds, there's cultural resources, there's a lot of other T&E species issues that happen in these watersheds. We do address recreation and access. We have over 20,000 acres of municipal watershed lands, and about 15 of those are open to public use. And so are the 25 or so reservoirs that we gather water from. And so this is also an impact to the water supply and quality. And then, of course, source water protection. You know, what do these land uses, what are these forest health conditions, what is all of this, how does this all tie together and come up with strategies to protect the water quality? So these are very complex questions to grapple with. And then, of course, there's always land use agreements and some of the other administration parts that go along with watershed management and managing a large water supply. So this is just really an introduction into the regional nature of utilities water supply system. We touch 11 counties, and all of these have watersheds that feed into our system. And so we have to do a lot of regional collaboration. We do a lot of work with the forest management, regional management issues, wildfire, and fuels reduction across different landscapes. And of course, there's like regional stormwater. Now, we introduced geographic specific plans into utility structure, where we're looking more specifically into smaller watershed units and really trying to detail out what is going on and how do we address you know, overuse around the reservoir, or even just the forest management within a small hydrologic unit. So you can imagine it was a great honor for Gary to come to us and ask for our perspective on how to do a large basin like the Arkansas Basin and address some of the issues and questions that people are trying to answer across the entire state. I mean, we have, you know, forest health issues, insects and disease, and all these things, and we're starting to realize this connectivity between the landscape condition and what it's doing to our water and how we're getting it to the users. And so, again, a great question and an honor to be working on that solution. So, of course, Heather's been really implementing the outreach and facilitation with the different stakeholders. And I apologize, I have a cold, so I have to or I'm gonna cough, and you really don't want to hear that. So, as Gary said, we've been providing the GIS support and data management with this. Heather's been facilitating a lot of outreach with different stakeholders. We had a meeting at kind of a side facilitated workshop at the statewide Basin Summit, Roundtable Summit, and really started asking people the questions. What are the threats out there? What does watershed management mean to you? What are the values that you have out there that, a watershed impacts? And as you can imagine, pretty much everybody that spoke had maybe a different perspective, a different point of view of what that meant. But there were some very common threads throughout that. And of course, a lot of what the state is trying to focus on is some of the fire aspects. So once we worked through this process, we really honed in on the threats, the top threats, which are the fire, the post-fire condition, which produces the flooding issues, sedimentation, water quality concerns, flooding in general, and then the contamination and possible degradation of water quality and insects and disease. So that were kind of the top threats. And then you have to ask, especially when you're mapping something, you're like, well, what are these threats to? And what are we putting on the map? Why do we even care what these are threats to? And so, again, it was kind of the discussion of the values of what are out there and why do we even care? And so the bottom line definition, I think, is where we came and we could pretty much have pretty good consensus on, is that we're really addressing the threats to the functional integrity of the hydrologic, biologic, and built environment dependent on for water supply and quality. So if we have a disruption in that, you could use an example of any fire that comes through and crosses over multiple boundaries, comes up to a reservoir, washes out a road after the first rain, and you can't get to your infrastructure. We just had a biologic, hydrologic, and built environment problem. So that's kind of how we went about to address what we're mapping and why we're mapping these things. That just looking at watershed health, looking outside of the water course, can help benefit the water supply and water quality nexus that is happening with all of this. If you can't address some of the forest health concerns like the beetle issues coming over from the Colorado side, Summit County, and how they're coming over, then you end up with another kind of West Fork complex condition, and that's your headwaters. So eventually it makes its way down in some way, and however that is translated through the water system, it is connected through that. So I encourage you to go out and see the maps afterwards. Put a dot in your places that you know where you work, live, play, that are very important, that are worth protecting, that are worth addressing from a forest health and watershed position. And then tell us why. There's a worksheet underneath, asks you some questions as to, why is it important, what's the risk to it. And we would love to hear from you. And again, make this a very robust process for as it rolls up into the water plan. Thank you.
Okay, we have with us today Nicole Seltzer, and is Scott still here, one of our board members, the Colorado Foundation for Water Education. You're starting to get this theme that we want your input. Elise, I'm going to give you a heads up that when we distribute the clickers, we'll put out input forms as well, if you would, and the PSA, the public service announcement. So what you're picking up here is this theme of, we really want your feedback. When we get to the Q&A portion, Heather and her team are going to come up, and it wouldn't be a meeting like this without a clicker survey. So we're going to ask you what you think, but we're also trying to lay a foundation as we go along to continue to get public feedback on what's important, what the values are we going the right direction? And the reason I give you that background now is that our PEPO repo, as Perry Cabot coined the phrase, our public education, public outreach liaison for the roundtable is Terry Book of the Pueblo Board of Waterworks, which means Paul Fanning does all the work, and he's doing a great job. And Mark, our next presenter, is also the PEPO rep for the Metro Roundtable. So he's been very involved, and wanted to bring him on the team because of that relationship between conservation and education, and to make sure we were getting the message out. So let me hand off to Mark, and I'll get his slideshow queued up.
Good to go.
Okay, you're good.
I'm good to go. My name is Mark Shively. I want to thank all of you for coming today. Thanks to most of you for staying awake this long in the afternoon. Thanks very kindly for having me. We heard a lot about conservation earlier in the day. I'm going to talk for a little bit about water efficiency. Water is precious. We should use it thoughtfully. We should support solutions for the future. And if we do that, we'll have water for generations to come. I think that's what we're trying to say to people, and we're getting ready to need to say it to a lot more folks. Again, today we're going to try to test some themes. I'm going to roll some out over the next few minutes. If you like them a lot, let us know. If you don't like them or we forgot something, please include it on the input forms. What we're going to talk about is where you're at, where you're going, and how do you want to get there next. And then lastly, as you hear, we have a couple of clicker questions on conservation. We'd ask you to give us your best thoughts on that. We heard a lot about conservation, and as you could kind of gather, it's got some baggage. If you get together with a bunch of people and you put them in focus groups and you say, what do you think about conservation, you get some off flavors. If you talk to them about being efficient and being smart and spending money wisely, they're really engaged in that. It's hard to argue for doing dumb things and doing them inefficiently and wasting money. So we talk about water efficiency from now on. We don't talk about conservation unless we just have to. There's some other lingo you heard today. Low conservation, medium conservation, high conservation. You know, what does that mean? If you have high conservation, are you using too much water? If you have low conservation, are you not doing enough? So we want to kind of, as we talk to more people, get into a little bit more plain spoken language. So we're going to say, you know, what would be good? And then over a period of time, what could you do that'd be a little bit better? And then finally, if you really got after it, what would be the best thing you could pursue? Words matter, so we want to talk in real plain spoken language to people as we try to get them involved in water efficiency and water solutions. So just to clarify, we heard a little bit about ag efficiency. You're going to hear a lot more about it tomorrow. It gets complex quickly. We're not talking about that. We heard a little bit about boaters and rafters and fishermen, so we're not going to talk about environmental efficiency. What this is about is municipal and industrial efficiency. That's towns and cities. What can they do? Here again, where are you at, where are you going, how are you going to get there? This new state water plan is going to take a new look from a higher level, and the last time that was done was 4 years ago as part of the statewide planning supply initiative you heard about. So there were a couple of main factors in that work several years ago. There was something called passive efficiency. That's what efficiency does to you. And active efficiency, that's what you can actually do yourself. A couple of quick examples. Your washing machine breaks down, you need a new one. You go to the store, the old one used a whole bunch of water. The new one uses just a little bit of water. You can't buy one anymore that uses a whole bunch of water. That would be passive efficiency. You didn't do anything, it just happened to you. An example of active efficiency would be you spend an hour a week going around looking through your system trying to determine where leaks are. That's active efficiency. That's really where we want to focus more, but we do want to promote people to make changes to more efficient uses of water. As far as where are we at now, I think we should have a snapshot of all the conservation plans that are in place. There's a lot of folks that provide a lot of water to their customers. They have plans in place. Maybe they've been there for a while. They're going to need updating. Maybe there's next steps they could take to get a little bit better than where good is right now. There's some smaller entities, maybe they haven't really looked at it. As prices rise for water, it's going to make a lot more sense. So we want to make it easy for those new entities to come along. There's something that we're going to have here towards the end of June. It's called House Bill 1051, and we're going to have a lot better data on how you use water and what your conservation plans that are in place look like. That helps us understand what's working, what do we want to do more of, what's not working so good. So for those of you that have plans already, you got a deadline coming up in June. There are a number of tools out there to help you plan and to help you fund implementation of your plan. So I'll just talk about that real quickly. Colorado Water Conservation Board has a concept of levels of efficiency. So here again, in a plain spoken fashion, what's a good way to approach the topic, what would be a little bit better, and what would be the best we can do. There are a number of toolboxes where you can just look and see what are some really good things that have worked for other people we might try. I'll mention the Southeast District has a website that contains a lot of those toolboxes. You might want to use that as a resource. We also want to measure our success. Somebody said if you can't measure something, it doesn't matter. I disagree with that, but you want to measure everything you can. On education and outreach, once again, keep it real simple, but we got to start talking not just to people in the room, but to our neighbors, folks we see on the street. We got to keep it simple. But we got to tell them water is precious and why. Everybody who wanted to took a shower this morning. If you didn't have that opportunity, you might understand just how precious it gets. You want to use it thoughtfully. You never want to waste it. However you use water, please be thoughtful with how you use it. And then lastly, support solutions for the future. We heard a lot of talk about storage and other things, but we got to start talking to people. The efficiency is a real good place to start. I did a presentation at this forum in Walsenburg last year. I spent half an hour on how to use YouTube and email to get really good exposure with people. I'll just talk about one real quick since Walsenburg. John Stolp was kind to get us a few minutes with the governor. We videotaped a 30-second public service announcement. In August, we did a test. We sent it out to a bunch of people by way of the internet and said, take a look at this, what do you think? Well, we got 72% of the people we sent it to watch it to completion. That's probably 15 times what we thought we'd do. The cost was 3.8 cents per message. Go try to send a postcard, see what it costs you to print it, see what it costs you to mail it, see how 3.8 cents stacks up, and we got 165,000 people look at this thing in 4 weeks. For water, that's pretty crazy. So there's tools out there. We want to use them as we talk to an increasingly wider audience. We have a program I'm kind of proud of. You might want to copy. We call it the Water Ambassador Program. If you think about what excites kids, it's Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber or something like that. And if I go in there to talk to them about water, they're going to throw me out instantly. Please stop. But if I can send somebody in who kind of looks like Justin Bieber, kind of looks like Taylor Swift, the kids are instantly going to go, oh, what's this all about? So we enlist high school kids as our ambassadors, and we teach them about water. Then we send them in to talk to fourth graders. The fourth graders are locked in immediately. And we like fourth graders because they like to learn. As we age, we become more locked into what we want to believe. We're not listening to it. We've decided how it's going to be. Fourth graders want to be successful. They want us to tell them how to do it. So we send in our people playing rock and roll about water. They listen. They're converted. They go home to mom and dad. And of course, we made the homework just a little bit too hard, so they have to ask mom and dad for help. And that's how we get our message into every family. So far, 25,000 kids 50,000 moms and dads, and most all of them vote. And we won some awards. Last year we got a national award for it. This year we got a statewide award for education. If you'd like to copy the program, it works pretty great. We will try to come up with some basic recommendations based upon the input we get from you. And here's just a couple ideas. Should everybody get a plan? Sure. Do you want to get better incrementally? If I go to lose weight and work out, I'm not going to yank 8 notches on my belt one afternoon. I'm going to start with one. I'm going to try to get the second one, and if I get to the third one, I'm happy. But we want to go incrementally, not try to become Israel or Australia overnight. We're us. There is a lot of financial funding out there in the way of grants, and currently it's about a 75%, for example, from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, 25% local. If you're needing to do something like this, they want to help you move along. And I also just want to mention, we have to go where local people live, and we have to bring our message. We can't really expect them to come to us. We have to go find them where they live and take the message. What's something you can do? I would advocate for building your public engagement efforts on water around efficiency for a couple of reasons. There's 5.2 million people in Colorado. We wouldn't want to try to fit them all in this room this afternoon. It would be ugly. But efficiency is something every one of them can't do. Maybe they can't come here this afternoon, but they can use water more efficiently in their home, at their work, or in their yard outside. I think efficiency helps you make best use of existing resources, and you heard somebody say you can conserve your way out of your problem. I don't think you can. I've looked at my calculator and fumes come out if I try to believe that. So what I'm going to say is it stretches existing supplies and it buys time until some of these other solutions can be implemented. It's well worth your time and money to pursue it. That's my piece. Thank you very kindly.
So right after Jairus, he's the most interesting conservation speaker I know. So our next presenter is Brett Gracely, and he's going to bring the municipal perspective to the dialogue.
Nope. So Gary's looking for the PowerPoint. At this point in the day, you've been looking at one darn slide after another. So if you're an introvert, look at your shoes. If you're an extrovert, look at your neighbor's shoes. So I'm just going to talk about some things here on municipal supply. Officially, within the context of 1177, I'm the El Paso County municipal representative. And so by that, I have a duty to talk to other municipalities in El Paso County. For the purposes of this forum here this afternoon, I talked to a couple of folks that we've done business with over a long time. So I'm wearing the badge today, but I want you to think about, for this part of the presentation, think about all the cities and towns throughout the basin. And I think one of the challenges we're facing is that within the 1177 definition, the municipal reps in all the roundtables for all the counties, the membership or the representation was restricted to folks that came from incorporated towns or home rule municipalities. I think we need to recognize that across the Arkansas Basin, we have folks that live in communities that are not in a home rule municipality. They're in a rural water district. Northern El Paso County was one of the areas that had the highest municipal gaps in the SWASI process. Those folks are not generally in towns. Just last week, Lower District approved the formation of a rural water authority to reflect that. So we have municipal style demands across the basin that are not necessarily represented by a city or town, and we need to figure out how to solicit that input as well. Like Jay said earlier, at this point in the day, a lot of the stuff that we end up talking about has already been said by others. And so you've heard from Kyle specifically and also from Kim the importance of soliciting input. You've seen a couple of slides today with the dates for the outreach meetings. I'm not so naive to think that Pueblo or Colorado Springs or even Buena Vista can characterize the unique municipal demands throughout the basin. And so I think it's important for folks, as you engage those public outreach meetings, to identify what the unique issues are. We certainly have some things in common. Mark talked about municipalities and things that the water supply function, using our water efficiently. I think you can make a real coherent argument that the most important water supply function, other than the shower, is putting water in the back of that tank on the toilet. We can skip a shower every day. There's probably something in the fridge we can drink. But if there's not water in the back of that tank, we've got some real public health and safety issues. And so we need to think about it in those contexts as well. So bring your issues to the table. The folks I talked to, because I wasn't going to just make this up from an El Paso County perspective, there's beyond that common mission of providing water in their municipalities, have some very unique differences. So I talked to Terry in the Upper Basin. I talked to Joe, actually we exchanged some emails here in the Lower Basin. Talked to Manny in the, I'll say, the middle of the basin, and talked to Sean up in Fountain Creek. So what are some of the themes that beyond a water supply mission that a municipality has that we have in common? Jim talked about it earlier today. Jay talked about it earlier today. Storage. Without exception, all of them talked about the importance of storage. Also, within the parlance of our 1177 roundtable process, we've talked about IPMPs. It was emphasized the importance of finishing the things that we've started. So, AVC, it has a rod, but it doesn't have funding yet. And so water quality in the Lower Basin, as Joe described to me, for those small municipalities, dealing with that and getting access to water that'll be available by AVC is an important part of where we go from here, and making sure that happens. One of the other things that, from kind of two different perspectives, that was highlighted as I talked to different municipalities were the various permitting and contracting challenges. So if you think about getting an excess capacity contract in a federal reservoir, is that process any different for a Cherokee for a few hundred acre feet as compared to Colorado Springs Utilities for tens of thousands of acre feet? Pretty much that hurdle is the same. You're still dealing with a federal agency and a NEPA process. And it would be no different if you pick some other example. You look at what Pueblo had to go through to get their excess capacity contract. What's it going to mean for other entities to develop storage? Many people in this room, many faces I recognize, have been involved in the PSOP process for over a decade now. What will it take for us to get a study bill to look at Pueblo Reservoir enlargement? And just answer the question. Maybe it can't be enlarged safely. The basin needs to know that. If we can't be enlarged safely, then we need to move on because the need for storage exists beyond just that reservoir. We need to figure out if it's a yes or a no. From an environmental permitting standpoint, I think Kyle made the reference to 3 and 3, and now it's 10 and 10. Is that really realistic? Is that what it's going to take for us to continue to develop storage? And that's not to say that we run all over environmental values or we tear up ecosystems in the development of projects. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we do have to get rational about what type of hurdles do we create for ourselves legally and regulatorily in those permitting processes. You can't get anything done. Any of you that commented on either the AVC EIS or the Southern Delivery System EIS and tried to wade through some of the technical memoranda, the reports that went into those environmental impact statements, you know about the level of effort that went into those, and you have to ask the question, did all that documentation really preserve the environment to any great extent? Is that really what the objective was in the end? Because I forget who it was that said earlier today, I think maybe it was Jim Broderick, the era of a single entity going and developing a storage project, whether it's on the main stem of a river or if it's on a tributary, those days are probably gone. If you look at any of the projects that are under construction or have been built or even approved recently, they are multi-agency collaborations and have multiple purposes with that. So again, I encourage you to get your input to your representatives. The Arkansas Basin Forum website does have the roster, so if you don't know who your municipal rep is in your county, find out who that is and get those. I just gave you a sampling of 4 kind of major subparts of the basin today. That certainly is not an exhaustive list of all the different municipal needs and the different strategies we need to pursue to meet those municipal demands. And I think the one kind of final comment I'd like to kind of highlight out here is I think that over time we've had this really weird antagonism between municipalities and the agricultural communities. And I think as we pull this basin plan together and continue the dialogue that Jim and Jay and Jairus talked about this morning, let's get past this antagonism. The cities and the agricultural areas, they need each other. Farmers can grow things all day long, but if they have no customers, they're going to go broke. And likewise, the cities need that food. And so if we can begin to talk more in a synergistic way, if I can use a $50 word this afternoon, and get past some of the rock throwing around some of these issues, I think we're going to be much better off. That is the end of my comments.
Thanks, Brett. Okay, so we're running really early, and what I'm thinking is we'll just go do these all again. Oh,